The second time they measured me for a wedding dress, my mother would not look at my face. She looked at the fabric, at the pins, at the floor, anywhere but me. The room smelled of chalk and starched cotton, and somewhere behind me a tape measure snapped back into a woman's palm, a small sound, but I felt it in my teeth. In our district, a bride does not simply get married. She is proven first, weighed, watched, passed, or set aside. I had been set aside once already, and standing there, half pinned into a dress I did not yet deserve, I understood I was about to fail again, and this time they would not call it mercy. My name is Miriam. I grew up in a small Amish settlement we called the Wexford District, tucked into the hills of northern Indiana, and I was 23 the winter I finally stopped trying to pass. This channel is where I tell the true things, quietly, honestly, that we were never allowed to say out loud behind the prayer cap. If any of this reaches something in you, I hope you'll subscribe and sit with me a while. This is a place for women who were measured by people who called it love. Before I go on, I want to ask you one thing, and I mean it plainly. Was there ever a moment in your life when you tried your very hardest to be enough and were told, still, that you were not? Tell me below. I read every word you leave. Now let me take you back to that sewing room. The sewing room at the back of my aunt's house was the coldest room in the county, and I say that as a woman who has stood in a barn in January. 3 of them worked around me that afternoon, my Aunt Sadie, the deacon's wife, and a neighbor woman whose name does not matter now. They moved slow. They pinned slow. Every so often one of them would step back and look at me the way you look at a horse before a sale, and I would hold still and keep my eyes down and pretend I could not feel it. The blue fabric was cool against my arms. Outside, snow was starting. You have to understand what a wedding dress meant where I come from. It was not white. It was not lace. It was plain blue wool, sewn by hand, and it did not belong to you until the day you wore it. Until then, it belonged to the district, to the women who decided whether you would ever be allowed to put it on. That is a thing the outside world does not know about us. A bride is not asked for. A bride is earned, and what is earned can be taken back, folded up, and put away in a chest for another girl who deserves it more. They called it being proven. I heard the word my whole life before I ever understood its weight. It was said quietly, the way people say the name of a sickness. Someone would murmur that a girl was being proven this season, and the older women would nod, and the younger ones would go still. I used to think it meant getting ready, learning to keep a house. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about a great many things I had been taught to be grateful for. But that afternoon in the sewing room, I already knew more than I wanted to. Because this was the second dress, the second fitting, the second time these same hands had measured me for the same blue wool. I do not know how to make you feel what that was like, so I will just tell you plainly and let it sit. Most girls are measured once. I was being measured again, in front of the same women who had watched me fail the first time, and every pin they set felt less like preparation and more like a question I was answering wrong. My Aunt Sadie kept a little tin of pins on the sill. I remember the sound they made when she dropped them in. There was a woman in our district, the deacon's wife, Verna, and Verna kept a kind of ledger, not on paper, in her face. She had watched 3 generations of girls go through their proving, and she remembered every one of them, who rose first, who complained, who cried when she thought no one could see. When Verna looked at you, you could feel her comparing you to someone. You never knew who. You only knew you were losing. That afternoon she watched me the longest, and she did not smile, and she did not frown. She just watched and made her small notes in the place where she kept them. I want to be fair because I have spent a long time learning to be fair to these women. They were not cruel for the pleasure of it. They believed, truly, that they were protecting something, the family, the faith, the boy I was meant to marry. His name was Eli Stutzman, and he was a good and gentle man, and none of what happened was his doing. He waited at home while the women decided whether he could have me. That was how it worked. The men chose, the women confirmed, and a girl learned to carry the weight of both while smiling like she carried nothing at all. There had been a girl before me, 2 seasons back, named Fanny. She was measured for her dress. She was proven. And she never married. No one said why out loud, only that she was not found ready, and after a while she stopped coming to the singings, and then she stopped coming to church altogether, and the district simply closed over the space where she had been, like water over a stone. I thought about Fanny a great deal that winter. I thought about her while Verna watched me. I wondered if anyone would say my name the way we had stopped saying hers. When the fitting was done, my mother helped me out of the dress without a word. Her hands were quick and careful, and she folded the blue wool the way she folded everything. Corners matched, creases sharp, and she laid it back in the chest and closed the lid. And that was when it happened, the thing I have never forgotten. She looked up, and for just a moment our eyes met, and then she looked away again, fast, as if she had touched something hot. My mother, who had raised me and fed me and taught me every stitch I knew, could not hold my gaze. And I understood, standing in that cold room in my plain slip, that she already knew what I was only beginning to fear. She knew how the second proving ended. She just could not be the one to tell me. Let me tell you now what the proving actually was, because I spent years thinking the word meant one thing, and the truth of it is smaller and worse. It was not a single test. It was a season. From the first frost to the wedding, a bride was watched. Not once, not on a set day, but every hour of every ordinary week. How many quarts she put up, how straight her rows came in, whether she rose before her mother or after, whether she sat still under correction or let something cross her face. There was no paper to study, no question you could prepare an answer for. The test was simply your life, and every moment of it counted. I think the outside world imagines the proving is about purity, about a girl's body, and whether she has kept it. I have seen the way people lean in when they hear the word, waiting for that. But it was never about that, not really. It was about labor and silence and stillness. It was about proving you could be worn down and never show it. A bride who could can 40 quarts in a day but wept doing it had failed. A bride who was slower but smiled had passed. They were not measuring what we could do. They were measuring what we would swallow. And here is the part that took me longest to say out loud. The ones doing the measuring were not the men. The bishop never watched me shell a single pea. The deacon never counted my rows. It was the women, my aunt, my neighbor, Verna, always Verna. They reported to one another in the small language women use when they think girls are not listening. A glance held a beat too long, a word left unfinished at the supper table. I had grown up trusting these women. They had braided my hair, and they were the ones keeping the ledger of whether I was fit to be loved. By midwinter, the watching had worn a groove in me. I ate watched. I prayed watched. When I lay down at night, I could still feel eyes on me, and I would make myself lie perfectly still, as if even my sleep were being graded. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from being observed without rest. It is not in the arms or the back. It is somewhere deeper. in the place where a person keeps herself. I was tired there, tired in the self. And a girl who is tired in the self makes mistakes, and I was about to make mine. It came on a Tuesday, at my aunt's table, over nothing. Verna corrected me. Some small thing, the way I had folded a batch of pillowcases, done wrong to her eye. And I was so tired, and so watched, and so full of the winter, that when she finished, I did not lower my head, the way a proven bride should. I looked at her, and I said, quiet, not sharp, just tired. I did it the way my mother taught me. 7 words, that was all. But in that room, on that day, with that woman, 7 words was a landslide. Nobody shouted. That is the thing people never believe. There was no scene. Verna simply went still, and then she looked across the table at my Aunt Sadie, and something passed between them that had no words in it at all. And Sadie looked down at her plate, and the supper went on. We finished the meal and cleared it, and I dried while my aunt washed, and not one person said a thing about what had happened. But it had happened. It had been seen, and I knew, the way you know weather is coming, that it had gone into the ledger. That was the first failing. I want you to understand how small it was, because that is the whole cruelty of it. I did not run away. I did not refuse the marriage. I did not sin against my body or my faith. I answered a woman with the truth in a soft voice one time, and it was enough to set the blue dress back in the chest and send word to Eli's family that Miriam was not yet found ready. They framed it as kindness. They said I would be given another season, another chance to be proven. And the terrible thing, the thing I am ashamed of even now, is that a part of me was grateful. A part of me believed I had earned the punishment. A part of me thought, yes, I did fail, and they are being merciful to let me try again. So I said thank you. I said I would do better, and when the second season came, I threw my whole self into it, harder than any girl before me, because I had learned the rules now, and I was sure I could pass them. But the second proving was not the same as the first. They had added something. There was a new thing they wanted me to show them this time, a thing you cannot put up in jars or plant in rows or measure with a tape, and I did not understand until it was far too late that it was the one thing I did not know how to give. The new thing they wanted was a quiet spirit. Those were the words Verna used, the first week of the second season, sitting in my mother's kitchen with her hands folded, like a woman about to pray. A quiet spirit, not quiet hands, I had those, not a quiet mouth. I had learned that lesson at my aunt's table, and I had not forgotten it. They wanted the quiet to go all the way down. They wanted to look at me and see nothing moving underneath, and they would watch me across the whole season to be sure it was real, because a quiet spirit, Verna said, cannot be put on like an apron. It either lives in you or it does not. So I set out to make it live in me. I rose before the birds and I worked past dark, and I said less each week than the week before, until whole days went by where I spoke only when spoken to. I made myself small, smaller than small. I practiced folding my face into nothing, the way you fold cloth, corners matched, creases sharp. If someone corrected me, I lowered my head before they had finished the sentence. I thought if I could just shrink far enough, quiet myself deep enough, there would be nothing left in me for them to fail. I did not understand that I was disappearing. I only understood that I was almost enough. My hands cracked that winter. The skin at my knuckles split from the cold water and the lie and the endless work, and it bled a little, and I hid it. I would press my fingers into my apron so the red would not show. because a proven bride does not flinch, and pain is a kind of noise. I look back now at that girl hiding her own blood so she would seem tireless, and I want to reach through the years and take her hands and tell her to stop, but she could not stop. She was so close. She could feel the blue dress waiting in the chest. It broke on an ordinary morning, and it broke over joy, of all things. My youngest brother said something at breakfast. I cannot even tell you what now. Some small foolish thing a boy of 6 says, and it was so sweet and so sudden that I laughed, out loud, before I could catch it. A real laugh, the kind that comes up from the bottom of you, the kind I had spent an entire season learning to strangle in the dark, and it was gone in a second. But Verna was there. Verna was always there, and I saw her hear it. I saw her file it away. Nothing was said that morning either. That is how it always was. The verdict never came in a single blow. It gathered, glance by glance, like snow that will not stop until the roof gives. Over the next weeks I felt it settling. A conversation that stopped when I entered a room. My mother crying quietly at the wash line when she thought I could not see. Eli's mother no longer stopping to speak with mine after church. I was being decided, slowly, in rooms I was not allowed into, by women who had known me since the day I was born. The words themselves came in my own kitchen, and I will tell you now who said them, because I have carried it long enough. It was not Verna. It was my mother. She sat me down at our table one evening, and she took my cracked hands in hers, and she could barely get it out, and what she said was, "They have decided, Miriam. You are not to be proven again." My mother, the one who taught me every stitch. She was the one they sent, because she was the one who could not refuse them, and I think that was the cruelest arithmetic of all. They made the person who loved me most deliver the thing that broke me. I looked for Eli after that. I thought if I could just see his face, hear him say he still wanted me, that any of it might yet be undone. But when I found him by his father's barn, he would not raise his eyes. He was a good man, I have told you that, and I believe it still. But he had been raised inside the same ledger I had, and he had learned that a woman the district sets aside is a woman you do not reach for. His silence was gentle. It was almost kind. And it was final. He said nothing, and in the saying of nothing he said everything, and I turned and walked back up the hill alone. And somewhere on that walk, in the cold, with my hands bleeding into my apron, a small thought came to me that I had never once been allowed to think. I had tried everything. I had canned and planted and risen early and swallowed my own voice and strangled my own laughter until there was almost nothing left of me at all, and it had still not been enough. And if it could not be done, if no girl could ever quiet herself deep enough to satisfy them, then maybe the fault was not in me. Maybe the test was built so that someone would always fail. And if that was true, I had to ask the question I had spent my whole life being kept from asking. What were they really protecting by keeping me from being loved? If this landed somewhere true in you, tell me below. I read every one. They came for the dress a week later. My mother took the blue wool out of the chest, and she did not fold it this time. There was nothing to fold it for. She simply carried it, loose over her arm, down to my Aunt Sadie's house where another girl was waiting to be measured. I stood at the window and watched her go. The tin of pins went with it, back to the sill in that cold room, ready to prick their questions into someone new. And I understood that the whole thing would begin again without me, exactly as it always had, as if I had never stood in that dress at all. The district closed over my place the way water closes over a stone. I was not shunned, I want to be honest about that, because the outside world hears these stories and imagines a woman cast out into the snow. It was quieter than that, and in its own way worse. I simply became the girl who had been proven twice and set aside twice, the cautionary one. Mothers did not point at me, but they did not have to. A girl only had to see me at the wash line, unmarried and marked, to know what she must never become. I was still fed, still greeted, still folded into the edges of every gathering. I had just been moved, gently and forever, to the place where the not enough are kept. For a long while I believed them. That is the part I am least proud of, and the part I most need you to hear. I lay awake naming my failures like beads on a string, the 7 words at my aunt's table, the laugh at breakfast, the blood I could not hide. I was certain, for months, that if I had only quieted myself 1 degree further, I would be a wife now. And then one evening I sat with Verna's own life in my mind, and something turned. I remembered that Verna, too, had once been a young bride. Verna had been proven, once, and she had passed by learning to watch other girls fail. That was the thing that finally freed me, and it did not feel like freedom. It felt like grief. I saw that every woman keeping the ledger had once stood shaking in the blue dress herself, and had survived it by turning the same cold eye on the next girl, and the next. The wound did not come down from the bishop or the deacon. It came sideways, mother to daughter, aunt to niece, woman to woman, handed along so faithfully that no one ever had to be a villain. They were not evil. They were simply passing on the only thing that had ever been passed to them, and I could keep passing it too. Or I could be the one it stopped with. When the 3rd season came, my Aunt Sadie told me, kindly, that the district had discussed it, and that I might be allowed to be proven one final time, that there was a widower 2 districts over who was not particular. A mercy, she called it. And I heard myself say no, not loud, not sharp, just a small, steady no, the first fully my own that I had ever spoken. I told her I would not be measured again. I did not run. I did not shout. I simply stepped off the path they had built for me and stood in the cold beside it and let them see that I meant it. It cost me. I will not pretend it did not. My mother wept, and my father would not speak to me for the better part of a year, and there were Sundays I sat alone on the women's bench, while the whispering moved around me like wind in a field. Belonging is a real thing to lose, and I lost a great deal of it. Anyone who tells you leaving that world is only freedom has never had to fold up their whole childhood and set it in a chest. But I had learned, at last, the difference between being loved and being approved of. They are not the same. I had spent my life auditioning for the second and calling it the first. So I will tell you what I kept, since they took the dress. I kept my voice, the one that answered Verna at the table, 7 true words in a soft tone that I no longer think was a sin. I kept the laugh that broke free at breakfast, and I let it break free every day now, on purpose, because a laugh is not noise. A laugh is a soul telling you it is still in there. I kept my hands, cracked as they were, and they healed. I had spent years believing that failing the proving meant I was not enough for love. I know now it meant I refused, at last, to keep trying out for a part in my own life. If you are out there tonight, and someone who called it love spent years handing you a test you were never meant to pass, measuring you, weighing you, folding you smaller each season until you could not find yourself in the mirror, I want you to hear this from a woman who failed it twice. You were never the thing that came up short. The ruler was crooked. It was made crooked on purpose, by people who had been measured by a crooked ruler themselves, and the bravest thing you will ever do is set it down. I still have that little tin of pins. My aunt gave it to me, years on, not knowing what it meant. I keep it on my own sill now, not to remember what they made me feel, but to remember the morning I stopped letting them. If this found you, subscribe and stay near. Tell me the test you finally refused. I read every single one, and I am not looking away from you. Not this time, not ever.